Hello Internet, this is Ramirez. I was going to do a video, I was going to wait. I did an unboxing video about a week ago, so that's given me about a week to play with my new sword from Darksword Armory. So I'm going to give a little review based on my experience and practicing playing with this sword. So this is their arming sword. And this is actually the sword as I got it, and you can go and look at the unboxing video. I do have the matching dagger, and at some point I may do a review of that as well. Part of the reason for doing this review is this is part of their new line. Darksword is going through great lengths to improve the quality of their swords. Now, I am not being paid by them or anything to say anything. These are just my insights, because I was very hesitant, even though I liked the sword, based on some of the reviews that were out there. I did call Darksword, I talked with them, and they said they were coming out with a new line, and if I wanted to pre-order it, I could pay the old and inherently cheaper price, but I could get the nicer and the better sword. So that's what I did, and I have to say, I am not disappointed. So I want to go over some of the features of the sword. If you've watched the unboxing video, you've seen that they had sent me the higher end integrated sword belt scabbard, which they actually weren't supposed to do. I didn't order it. I ordered it with a regular scabbard. And I'm going to go into some of the pluses and minuses on that. To Darksword's credit, they said just keep it and we will send you the regular scabbard. And I didn't have to pay any other postage or anything. They let me keep this. I do have the other one here, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, because I am going to talk about some of the differences and why that might be important to you. But let's first talk about what we want to talk about, which is the sword. Now, I have to say, this sword is beautiful. It's really very shiny, so I'm going to try to bring that up to the camera so you can really appreciate that blade. Coming up to these nice, really pointy ends on the guard of the hilt, and then a nice, solid, widely based pommel. The overall feel of it is that it is very light. Now, granted, I spent years working for Ren fairs, which means I've dealt with things like Starfire swords, which are just beasts of weapons and really made for stage combat. But this is very light. I mean, even in comparison to my rapier, it's a comparable weight. It's a very, very light sword, very fast in the hand. Balance, and I don't know if all dark swords do this, but it seems the balance point is actually in line with their logo. I don't know if every sword they do that, but if you can see the Darksword logo there, it's actually, that's where the balance point is. So maybe about an inch and a half, if I get the balance, about an inch and a half off of the end of the cross guard. So yeah, an inch, inch and a half, maybe 2 inches. I did not do an exact measurement before this video. The one thing I did note was that it was kind of even with where the maker's mark is on the sword, which I thought was kind of neat. I don't know if all of their long swords and other swords have that, where they've actually marked the center of balance by where they put the maker's mark, but I thought it was a neat feature on this sword. I have to say it is very thin. I can even bring that edge kind of up to the camera. You know, that kind of concerned me initially, just see just how thin that blade is. But once again, I was used to other larger swords, some sword-like objects, so I wasn't really prepared for it to be that thin. I think it is actually thinner than the diamond cross on my rapier. So that kind of surprised me. At first I was kind of concerned about it, but after a while of using it, I said aside from the flex, there is a little bit of waviness towards the tip in doing some cuts, so your technique isn't exact in terms of how you're bringing that blade across. If your technique is bad, you're going to feel that little bit of play at the end of the blade. But then again, this is not a strict cutter. This was designed, the blade point is more narrow. It is designed for thrusting, and it does a wonderful job of going through things. Because of that thinness, because of the narrowness of that point, any type of thrust technique works really well. As I said, very, very light in the hand, so you can sit out here and just hold that. It's very nice. You can threaten the camera. Works out really, really well, and it's sad to say that really surprised me just how nimble this sword actually was. A plus side and a downside, one of the things that kind of caught me off guard was I wanted it because it had these points on the guard, and I'll once again bring that a little closer so you can see those points. And normally you would think that's kind of decorative, maybe that would be able to be used to hit somebody, and I got to tell you, these things are deadly. They are very sharp. I actually had it scabbarded and I put it in, and it would actually catch on my shirt. So I had to throw out a shirt that had a huge hole in it because I had put the point against the cloth and it just went right through it. So on the scale of deadliness, don't rule these out. I mean, if I had to literally punch someone, or I was doing some sort of guard technique and I had to come through with that, I absolutely would, and I'd be confident if I got that into someone's throat, they'd be going in, they'd be coughing up a lot of blood. So that's kind of a nice thing, but it's pardon the pun, it's a double-edged sword. Which, moving on, this is a double-edged sword. I did get their sharpening service, and while, yeah, I can definitely say that it is sharp. It is not overly sharp or razor sharp. Obviously, I can put my fingers against it. Not going to drag them along, but I don't know if the additional $30 was worth it. I think if you're like me, you live in an apartment, you don't have sharpening equipment of your own, go ahead and get the service. It's probably better than if it were unsharpened. My current plans are to get a work sharp and do some sword sharpening on some other swords that I have. So this definitely is sharper than what would be a blunt sword. And so, as for the sharpening, if you already sharpen swords, you might want to skip that. If you are in a circumstance where you don't have access to a sharpener or sharpening service, that might be a worthwhile investment to do. Once again, this is, I believe, a 1060 carbon steel, spring steel, and it does have a bit of flex to it, so I can easily kind of put a little bend in there, and it does return. So that's kind of really, really nice. I'm going to quickly just wipe that down. I know probably I'm more meticulous about that than I should be, or more concerned about it, but hey, it's a brand new sword. At the end of the day, even if I got it for a cheaper price, it's still an expensive thing. So on to one of the big issues which people have said about Darksword Armory that I do want to get into as far as this sword. Originally they were doing threaded and then peened pommels. Apparently they have abandoned that just to do a peen, and that has increased the integrity. There is another video on YouTube of another guy who actually did open his Scabbard or his hilt assembly up to show the new tangs, and you could see that it had no screw point. It was just a solid tang. I want to prove that to you and show you something that I think was interesting when I saw it. If you look very carefully here, that is a rectangular peen, which means they brought the hilt all the way through to the end, and it's square. So you can't really thread that, because if you could, there's no way to screw it around. It's not a circular peen, but actually a square and slightly rectangular peen. So that certainly, in my mind, confirms that this is not a threaded and then peened, or heaven forbid, just threaded. This was actually just peened, which means the tang is probably a lot more structurally sound. And when I'm moving, I don't feel like any real shake. The grip feels really solid. One of the things that I was kind of disappointed with was I had seen other people say this is stitched leather, and it seems like either this is a leather and some type of cord wrap on top of that, or it was just shaped. I mean, the leather was, I believe what happened was the cord feel to this was probably a cord wrapped around it really, really tight, and it seems that it's glued. I can see where it's glued, but I cannot see where it is stitched. So that may be a change. It does feel very solid, so I don't want to take that away from the handle, but I had some reviews that said it was stitched closed. I was kind of disappointed to see that it looks like it was just glued in place. So that may not be the case. Once again, I'm not disassembling this to tell you one way or the other. This is just to kind of give you my impressions of the sword. I don't regret my purchase. At a price point, I think that's currently like, I think that I had paid about a little over $400 for it. I think now it goes a little bit higher. I think it's like $450 or somewhere in that margin. Still, you know, half the cost of a comparable Albion. So, you know, for something that is hand forged, it's not machine cut, I'm very, very pleased. This is a very, very nice sword. As I said, I look forward to doing more stuff, more cuts and cutting tests with it. It is a little different than other swords because it is a one-handed arming sword. So tip cuts have worked really well on some things, but technically, you know, having seen a few other people who are doing cutting videos with arming swords, you tend to have to go a little bit deeper with your cut to get through really heavy objects. I have done a cut test versus my own cutlass and my own katana, and yeah, because of the weight, it's not going to carry through the same way. It's a very light sword, and it's a trade-off of, yeah, large sweeping cuts against flesh or thrusts does really good. When you're talking about cutting capacity really into the heart of something, you just don't have the mass. You're not going to get the same type of cuts you'd get out of a katana or a cutlass or even a longsword, a heavier blade. So that was a trade-off. Once again, for me, that works because this is something I really don't have. It's kind of a companion piece to my rapier and doing rapier type sword work, and this is also another lighter sword, albeit a little earlier period, to do different types of cuts. And if I want to do stuff with heavier cuts, I'll go to my saber or I will go to my katana. So I'm fine with that. I like it. If you are someone who wants to, you know, really kind of muscle through with a lot of force, I would say this probably is not the sword for you. This sword is, however, very light, very fast, so if what you want to do has to do with being fast and moving quickly in your technique, then I would recommend this sword. If you wanted something heavier, I would probably go with something more like a Viking sword, a Viking blade, which would be a lot heavier and still be a one-handed blade. So, I think that covers what I want to talk about the sword itself. I am going to talk a little bit about scabbards. So first off, in my unboxing video, I showed you that they did send me the scabbard with the integrated sword belt. And it's really cool. And it was a complete mistake on their part. Apparently their shipping people were supposed to send me a regular scabbard. I guess with all the other stuff I bought, they kind of must have assumed that I had gotten the higher end scabbard and they had put it in the box. So, very quickly, I'm going to try to take this out. And you might say, well, you know, Ramirez, if you got the higher end scabbard, why did you complain? I would have just shut up and taken it. And I'll be honest with you, it did not entirely have to do with my altruistic and honest nature, but a simple practical fact, which I'll get into in a moment. But this belt is really nice, and it's very, very simple to wear. And basically, you take the short end with 2 holes, you take your belt, Put that around the back. You're going to have two little tongues on the belt. Put the top tongue through the top hole. Put the bottom tongue through the bottom hole. And tighten. And once you have it where you want it, you just take the tongues, you tuck them underneath the belt, pull those through the tongues underneath, and then pull to tighten it. And that's it. Voila, you're done. Yay! You're going to have a sword belt. You have a sword. You can now, albeit carefully, you can scabbard your sword. It hangs at a nice, convenient angle. Once again, don't get those points too close to your clothing, which kind of already pushes it out a little bit. So I'll stand a little closer to the camera so you can see that. Try to get a little higher. But yeah, it's a great belt, very convenient. I can put other things. I can put my sword. I can put a pouch on this belt. It's very secure. All of this is great except for one thing. This is meant for someone who's right-handed. I am left-handed. So I never wanted this belt. I didn't know if it was reversible or anything like that. It is not reversible. It is only designed for someone to wear the sword on their left side. So it is intended for someone who draws with the right hand. I don't think, in talking with Darksword about it, yeah, they don't make a left-handed version of this, so that's something to keep in mind. If you plan to wear this sword, and you plan to wear it and you are left-handed, don't get the integrated sword belt, because that scabbard is designed to be worn and only to be worn on the left side, so it is ideal if you are right-handed. Another thing you will notice about a lot of them, they are wooden, they are solid scabbard, they do have a little bit of give in there. I noticed that this was just a hair longer because when I put it up against the original scabbard, I'm going to take the sword out for a moment. If I hold them from the exact same point, so at the top of the lip, I'm going to just balance that out and go all the way down, you'll notice that the one with the integrated sword belt is slightly longer. Now you might say, hey Ramirez, doesn't that also have an integrated sword belt? And the answer is no. This is actually the regular scabbard. If I bring it really up to the camera, you can kind of see that lacing on there. This is actually a separate sword belt that I had specifically bought to wear with the sword, with the rest of my kit. And this particular sword belt is a double wrapped sword belt. I got it from Ravenwood Leather, and since it's my review, I can talk about pretty much anything I want. But I got it. This could either be used left-handed or right-handed, but it was a separate thing that I bought, and I just wanted it. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. This is one of the things where the integrated sword belt, if you're right-handed, just get that. This does tend to hold the scabbard straight up and down, but I can take that other belt, then find where I want my sword to kind of hang. Probably a little less medieval because it does have a buckle to it. But I more or less do the same thing. I take the end, pop it through underneath, pop that through, And once again, so this is a double wrap sword belt from Ravenwood Leather. And I don't know if you can see that. I'll try to turn the camera a little bit. But this sword just kind of hangs straight down. Still works fine. So I can still take my scabbard and my sword, just pop that in there, and I'm good to go. It does, thankfully. Scabbard does kind of push the edges, the points away from the body, so you're less likely to catch it on stuff. But I did notice that, and I got it in correctly this time, but this sword has this scabbard has a much tighter fit. There is still some of that shaking, but it's not nearly as bad on the scabbard that comes without the belt. And once again, you can always buy a belt, whether or not you do this particular belt or another type of belt or a sword frog that you can put it on. Because really what this is really, really long belt, and then it just has a sword frog that's kind of attached to the belt. But as I said, it does fit, but it sometimes on this scabbard, it'll catch on the chape and it won't want to go down all the way. You can kind of see a little bit of that blade sticking out. So you got to kind of futz with it a little bit to get it to fit all the way in to the metal chape. And when you do that, it doesn't really make that sound as much. It does tend to hold it very well. So if you can get it all the way in there, it does tend to lock up. I'm still kind of shaking it and it's still staying in there. So I am very pleased that on the regular scabbard, it tends to hold the sword very well. My experience with the integrated scabbard, I don't have that problem. I guess it never reaches the metal chape, so it'll go down all the way in. Trade-off is it will pop back out, so that's not ideal. I suspect it is possible. I'm not going to put words in Darksword's mouth, but I think this is a generic size, and they kind of fit whichever swords fit in which. The other one is really more tailored to this sword. So the trade-off is you've got this belt, which is an upcharge if you get it with the scabbard, but I'll be honest with you, for the additional sword belt that I bought, I paid a little over $80 for that belt. So now there are probably cheaper belts and cheaper options. I just went with that. So it probably would have cost me the same to have the integrated sword belt or the regular scabbard and a separate belt. So if you're right-handed, I would tell you that, yeah, the integrated sword belt is a good deal. So those are some of my immediate thoughts on the sword. So once again, I'm going to take that sword out. As I said, I think they did solve the issue when it came to that peen. So as I said, they're now actually being peened instead of having any threading. So that should really help any issues with the tang. I think this tang is probably more solid than the older ones. I do not have an older one to compare it to. I was just doing research on YouTube, and I think that many of the complaints about Darksword that had kind of plagued them for a while are getting solved. I'm very happy with my purchase. So hopefully if you are considering a Darksword, or specifically the Darksword Archer Sword, that I can say I'm very happy with my purchase. If you are kind of concerned about the threaded versus the peened, I think at this point, if you contact Darksword, they can tell you whether or not they're the newer upgraded ones. I would be wary of buying them right now through second sellers, because there still are some of the older models out there probably. So if you see one that's on sale like $100 or $200 less than what it costs off the website, you might be getting one of their older models, and you might have some of the issues that other people have brought up against Darksword Armory. but I think they are kind of moving forward. I'm glad I did take the risk and get one. As I said, their customer service with me, they didn't even argue about replacing the Scabbard. They were like, keep the other Scabbard and we'll send you the other one. A week later, I had it. They didn't charge me shipping or anything for that. They said it was their mistake, which is good. Now I have two Scabbards. Actually, the one with the integrated sword belt kind of hangs on my wall, so when I'm actually leaving this at home, it has a nice decorative scabbard for my wall. And then when I want to actually go to events or go outside and practice with it, I have a whole nother scabbard that I can use for when I bring it out and I travel with it. So this has been my review of the Darksword Armory Arming sword. And if you have any questions, you can leave a comment. And once again, this is Ramirez, and I'm signing off.